People think silence is safe until it starts watching you back. I used to believe the quietest table in the room was the least dangerous. That was before tonight. The restaurant was glowing like a polished lie, golden chandeliers dripping light onto marble floors that cost more than my entire life. I balanced a tray against my palm, forcing my fingers to stay steady as I moved between tables. Glasses clinked softly, laughter rose and fell in waves, but something in the air felt off. Heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks open the sky. Table 12 was the only place that didn't belong to the noise. A man sat there alone. He didn't move much, didn't speak, just watched. Dark suit, clean lines, no jewelry that caught the light. He looked like someone who had never once needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. I had served enough powerful men to recognize the difference between wealth and authority. Wealth talked. Authority stayed silent. I felt his gaze once as I passed, steady, unreadable. It didn't follow me like the others did. It assessed me like I was already part of a decision he had made long before I walked into his line of sight. "Emma, table 7 needs wine," Marco called from across the floor. "On it," I answered automatically. My shift uniform clung to my skin under the heat of the room, my feet aching inside shoes that had stopped being comfortable months ago. I kept moving. That was the rule. Don't stop. Don't think. Don't notice things that don't concern you. But I noticed them anyway. The front doors opened. Cold air slipped inside. 3 men walked in. They weren't dressed like guests. They were dressed like trouble trying to pass as normal. One of them scanned the room too slowly, like he owned it. Another laughed at something only he heard. The third never smiled at all. Mark Sullivan, Derek Rowe, Tony Briggs. I didn't know their names then. I just felt them. They stopped halfway in, and the way they looked around wasn't curiosity. It was selection. My tray tilted slightly in my hands. "Hey," one of them called out. Not to me at first, but then it was to me. "Waitress." I turned. Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. "Yes?" I asked, forcing politeness into my voice. He stepped closer. Too close. Close enough that I could smell alcohol under expensive cologne. "You've been working here long?" he asked. "It's a restaurant," I said carefully. "People usually work here." A couple of guests nearby laughed under their breath. I thought it was over. It wasn't. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Funny girl," he said. "We just want to talk." I felt it then, the shift. Not just his attention, but his intention. My fingers tightened around the tray. "I'm working," I said. "If you need something," I said. "Talk," he interrupted. And suddenly, the room didn't feel as full as it did a moment ago. Because no one was looking at us anymore. Not the other waiters. Not the guests. Not even Marco. Everyone had decided, silently, that this wasn't theirs to interrupt. I swallowed. "I can't," I said. Another step closer. Then another. And that was when I felt it again. That gaze from table 12. Still there. Still watching. But unchanged. Like none of this mattered enough to break his silence. My heartbeat grew louder than the music. "Step aside," the man said now, voice lower. My back brushed the edge of a service station. There was nowhere left to move. And still, table 12 remained quiet. The man there didn't stand. Didn't react. Didn't save me. And somehow, that scared me more than the 3 men walking closer. Because silence like that is never empty. It's waiting. The first time I realized danger doesn't announce itself, it was already too late. It arrives quietly, like a shadow that learns your name before you do. I was halfway through refilling a wine glass when I saw them again. 3 men. Same ones. They had moved deeper into the restaurant now, no longer pretending to browse or talk casually. Their presence cut through the dining room like something foreign, too loud even when they weren't speaking. I felt it in the way conversations softened around them, in the way people suddenly became more interested in their plates than in the room. Mark Sullivan was the first to stop in front of me. "You," he said. My fingers tightened around the bottle. "I'm working," I replied, forcing my voice to stay even. "If you need a table, we don't need a table," Derek Rowe cut in, stepping closer. His smile was thin, practiced. "We need you to listen." Something inside me told me to move, to walk away, to call for Marco. But Marco was already pretending not to see. So was everyone else. That's when I understood something I didn't want to understand. No one was coming. "I don't know you," I said quietly. Tony Briggs laughed under his breath. "That's not how this works, sweetheart." Sweetheart. The word made my skin crawl. They surrounded me without fully closing the circle, like they were confident I wouldn't dare test the space between them. I took a small step back. My heel hit the base of a service station. Dead end. Derek leaned slightly forward. You heard something earlier, he said. Something you shouldn't have heard. My stomach tightened. I forced a breath. I serve drinks. That's it. I don't listen to conversations. Wrong answer, Mark said. His hand lifted, not fast, not aggressive yet, but deliberate. A warning pretending to be casual. That was when I felt it again. That gaze from table 12. Still there. Still watching. Still silent. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see him. The man in the dark suit hadn't moved. Victor Hale. He sat exactly where he had been since I started my shift, one arm resting on the table, the other near a glass he hadn't touched in minutes. His posture was unchanged. Calm. Controlled. Like the world around him was nothing more than background noise he could turn off at will. And for a moment, I hated him for it. Because he saw everything. And still did nothing. Are you listening to me? Derek snapped, stepping closer into my space. I turned back instantly, heart pounding harder now. Yes, I said, sharper than I intended. I am. Good. Tony said softly, almost satisfied. Then you understand the situation. I didn't. But I knew enough to feel trapped. Derek's hand moved toward my wrist. Not touching yet. Just close enough to promise it. You're going to tell us what you heard, he said. And then you're going to forget you ever heard it. My breath caught. I didn't hear anything. I said again, quieter now. I swear. Mark sighed like I was disappointing him. That's the problem with people like you, he said. You always think you get a choice. The air felt heavier. The restaurant sound faded. Not fully, but enough that I noticed it. Forks slowing. Conversations shifting. People pretending not to look while clearly looking. Still no one moved. Still no one helped. My pulse hammered in my ears. And then, chair legs scraped. A single sound. Not from behind me. From table 12. I didn't turn right away. I didn't need to. The entire room changed before I even saw him move. Silence spread outward like a wave. Derek noticed it too. His expression flickered, just slightly. What the? I turned my head. Victor Hale stood up. No rush. No hesitation. Just certainty. He adjusted his jacket once, as if the act itself mattered more than everything happening around him. And for the first time since I'd been cornered, I felt the air shift behind me like something had stepped into existence that couldn't be ignored anymore. His voice came next. Low. Even. Controlled. But it didn't belong in the same category as the men in front of me. Step away from her. No threat in the words. That was what made them dangerous. Derek let out a short laugh. Or what? Victor took one step forward. Just one. And the space between us stopped feeling like a restaurant. It felt like territory. You're already standing in the wrong place, Victor said quietly. Don't make it permanent. The moment silence changes its target, you realize it was never silence at all. I should have run when Victor Hale stood up. But fear has a strange way of freezing the body before it convinces the mind. The three men around me didn't move at first. They only shifted their attention, slowly, unwillingly, like their instincts were arguing with what their eyes were seeing. Mark Sullivan scoffed. This doesn't concern you, he said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Victor took another step forward. The sound of his shoes against the marble floor was soft. Too soft. Like the room itself was lowering its volume just for him. I think it does, Victor replied. No anger. No raised tone. Just certainty. And somehow that was worse. I stood between them without meaning to, like my body had forgotten it was supposed to be afraid of one side more than the other. My wrist still burned from where Derek had almost grabbed me earlier, but now even that pain felt distant, unreal. Derek Rowe tilted his head. You're table 12, he said, like recognition should matter. You're just a customer. Victor stopped. For the first time, he actually looked at them directly. Not at me. At them. And the air tightened. Then you should understand something, Victor said calmly. Customers don't touch what's not theirs. Tony Briggs laughed, but it came out forced. We didn't touch anything. We were just talking to her. Victor's gaze flicked briefly to me. Just a glance. But it felt like being weighed, measured, and understood in a way I didn't consent to. Then he looked back at them. And she said no, he replied. Silence dropped again. Not restaurant silence. Something deeper. Like the building itself had decided to listen. Mark took a half step forward, trying to reclaim control. Listen, man. Victor interrupted him without raising his voice. I already did. That was when I noticed it. Not what he said. How everyone reacted to him saying it. A waiter near the bar stopped moving entirely. A couple at the far table pretended to drink, but didn't blink. Even Marco, who usually shouted through chaos, stayed frozen behind the counter. No one intervened. Not because they didn't see. Because they recognized something they didn't want to name. Derek exhaled sharply. "This is none of your business," he repeated, weaker now. She heard something she shouldn't have. "That's it." Victor nodded once. Slow. Like he was confirming a fact he already knew. "And now you're going to leave," he said. Tony frowned. "Or what?" That word hung there. Or what? A challenge built on ignorance. Victor took another step closer. And the space between them stopped feeling like distance. It started feeling like ownership. "There are two kinds of mistakes," Victor said quietly. "The ones you fix, and the ones you survive." My chest tightened. I didn't understand what was happening, but I understood enough to know the room had changed rules. Derek forced a smile. "You think you scare us?" Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked past them. At me. And for the first time, I saw something different in his expression. Not coldness. Not control. Awareness. Like I had become something he hadn't planned for. Then he said, still calm, "I don't need to scare you." A pause. Just enough for the words to sink in. "I just need you to understand where you are standing." Mark's jaw tightened. "And where is that?" Victor's voice lowered slightly, but the entire room heard it. "Inside my decision." The words landed like a weight. Not a threat. A conclusion. Derek's confidence finally cracked. "You don't even know what this is about," he snapped. Victor finally moved again. One step. Then another. And suddenly he wasn't across the room anymore. He was close enough that the temperature between them felt different. "I know exactly what this is about," Victor said. His eyes didn't leave them. "But you're about to find out what it costs." And for the first time since they entered the restaurant, none of the three men looked certain they were in control anymore. Some people don't notice power when it enters a room. I've learned it doesn't enter. It rewrites the room. The air after Victor Hale spoke felt different. Not quieter. Not louder. Heavier. Like every breath now had to pass through him before it reached anyone else. I stood there, frozen between three men who suddenly didn't look as confident as they did minutes ago. My pulse was still loud in my ears, but it no longer felt like the loudest thing in the room. Victor didn't move closer immediately. He didn't need to. Control, I realized, isn't about proximity. It's about certainty. Derek Rowe tried to recover first. "This is ridiculous," he said, forcing a laugh that didn't land. "We're not doing anything illegal. We're just talking." Victor tilted his head slightly. A small movement, but it pulled the entire room with it. "Talking," Victor repeated softly, as if testing the word. "Is that what you call blocking someone's path?" Mark Sullivan shifted his stance. "I think you're misunderstanding the situation," he said. Victor's eyes didn't leave him. "I think you are," he replied. And that was when I noticed something terrifying. It wasn't just that Victor was calm. It was that the world around him was responding to that calm like it was law. A glass stopped clinking midair in a waiter's hand. A guest lowered their phone without realizing it. Even the music in the background felt distant now, like it had been pushed behind glass. Tony Briggs stepped slightly to the side, trying to angle himself away from Victor's direct line. "Listen," Tony said, "we don't want trouble." Victor took another step forward. Still slow. Still controlled. "You already have it," he said. My throat tightened. I should have moved away. I should have gone behind the counter. I should have done anything that didn't involve standing in the middle of this invisible war. But I couldn't. Because Victor's presence wasn't just pushing them back. It was anchoring me in place. Derek's eyes flicked toward me briefly, like he was recalculating the situation. "She's not worth this," he muttered. That sentence did something strange. Not to Victor. To me. Like I was suddenly no longer invisible in my own story. Victor's gaze shifted instantly. Not angry. Not louder. Sharper. "That's where you're wrong," he said. The words landed cleanly. No emotion wasted. Derek frowned. "Excuse me." Victor stepped closer again. Now he was close enough that I could see details I hadn't noticed before. The faint crease at his wrist, the way his posture never bent, even slightly under the weight of tension, the stillness that wasn't natural but trained. "She's not part of your problem," Victor said. "She's the reason you have one." Silence cracked open. Mark let out a short, uneasy breath. "You're making this bigger than it is." Victor finally looked at all three of them at once. And somehow, That felt like being judged as a group. No, he said. You made it bigger the moment you thought she was alone. My fingers curled slightly at my side. Alone. That word hit harder than I expected. Because that was exactly what it had felt like before he stood up. Derek's confidence was slipping now, replaced with something less stable. You don't even know who we are, he said. Victor's expression didn't change. I don't need to, he replied. A pause. Then, quieter. I know what you did. That sentence changed everything. Not because it was loud. Because it wasn't explained. It implied history. Knowledge. Reach. Tony glanced at Derek now, uncertainty creeping in. We should go, Tony muttered. Mark hesitated. Derek didn't move. That hesitation lasted only a second. But in rooms like this, a second is enough for power to shift owners. Victor noticed it. Of course he did. You're deciding slowly, he said. That's dangerous. Derek swallowed. We're not afraid of you. Victor stepped one final time closer. Now there was almost no space left between them. You should be, he said simply. And then, for the first time since this started, he looked past them again. At me. The noise of the world faded slightly when his attention touched me, like everything else was temporarily irrelevant. His voice lowered, not softer, just meant for me instead of them. Are you hurt? 2 words. Not dramatic, not emotional, but they hit deeper than everything that came before. Because no one had asked that yet. Not once. And in that moment, I realized something I couldn't unfeel. The danger hadn't started when they cornered me. It started when someone finally decided I mattered enough to stop it. Power doesn't always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it arrives in the form of restraint. The moment Victor Hale spoke again, the room stopped pretending. Not completely, but enough. Enough that every breath felt measured, like even oxygen had to pass through invisible permission before reaching us. I didn't realize I had stepped slightly backward until my heel touched the edge of a table leg. I wasn't running. I wasn't even moving consciously. My body was simply adjusting to something it didn't understand yet. 3 men. 1 man. And suddenly, the difference felt less like numbers and more like physics. Derek Rowe forced a short laugh. You really think this is necessary? He asked, gesturing loosely around the room as if the audience might support him. We're in a public place. Victor didn't respond immediately. He looked at Derek the way someone looks at a door they've already decided is locked. I know where I am, Victor said finally. The question is whether you do. Mark Sullivan shifted again, less certain now. This is escalating for no reason, Mark added quickly. We didn't hurt anyone. Victor's gaze flicked briefly to my wrist. Just for a second. But it was enough for me to realize I was still holding my arms slightly tense, like my body was waiting for something to happen again. Then he looked back at them. Not yet, he said. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Tony Briggs exhaled sharply, trying to reclaim control of the moment. Look, we don't know who you are, he said. But this isn't your fight. That sentence hung there longer than it should have. Because it revealed something important. They didn't recognize him. Not fully. But they recognized enough to hesitate anyway. Victor took another step forward. And with it, the entire dynamic in the room subtly tilted. It wasn't aggression. It was certainty moving through space. You made it my fight the moment you chose her, Victor said. My throat tightened at that. Her. Not Waitress. Not accident. Not background. Me. Derek's expression hardened, but there was strain underneath it now. She heard something she shouldn't have, Derek insisted. That's all this is. Victor paused. For the first time, he didn't respond instantly. Instead, he glanced at me again. And in that brief silence, something unspoken passed through the space between us. Not protection yet. Not trust. Recognition. Then he turned back. No, Victor said quietly. That's what you told yourself so you could justify it. A waiter near the bar dropped a glass cloth without realizing it. It didn't hit the floor, but no one moved to pick it up. Even the sound felt hesitant. Derek's patience snapped slightly. You're not law enforcement, he said sharply. You don't get to decide. Victor cut him off without raising his voice. I don't decide, he said. I correct. That word changed something. Correct. Not punish. Not threaten. Correct. Like the situation had already been evaluated and found structurally wrong. Mark finally stepped half a step back. Just a small retreat. But I saw it. Tony noticed it too. Derek, Tony muttered under his breath. This isn't worth it. Derek didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on Victor, but something behind his expression was shifting now. Calculation replacing confidence, slowly overtaking it like water filling a sinking room. Victor noticed that too. Of course he did. Good, Victor said softly. Derek frowned. Good. Victor nodded once. Now you're thinking, he said. That means you still have time. The implication landed harder than any threat could have. Time. As if the situation had already crossed a threshold they hadn't recognized. I felt my breathing finally steady slightly, not because it was over, but because something stronger than panic had replaced it. Awareness. Victor took one final step closer. Now he was close enough that the space between him and them no longer felt negotiable. It felt owned. You're going to leave, Victor said calmly. And you're going to forget you were ever here. Derek let out a short, humorless laugh. And if we don't? Victor's eyes didn't change, but the room did. I didn't ask, he said. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't understood before. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was the point where reality started obeying someone else. There are moments when truth doesn't arrive. It is revealed by who stops pretending first. The silence in the restaurant after Victor Hale spoke felt different now. Not tense, not uncertain, but exposed. Like something hidden had been pulled into the light, and everyone was deciding, at the same time, whether to admit they had seen it all along. I couldn't tell when my breathing started to feel normal again. Maybe it hadn't. Maybe I was just adapting to fear in smaller doses now, like the body learning a new language it never wanted to speak. Victor didn't look at the three men anymore. Not immediately. Instead, he looked at me. And for the first time since this began, that attention didn't feel like collateral damage. It felt deliberate. You're shaking, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. I instinctively tightened my grip on the tray I was still holding, even though I had forgotten I was holding it at all. I'm fine, I lied. A small pause. Victor's expression didn't change, but something in his focus softened. Not weakness, not emotion, just a recalibration of priority. Sit down, he said. The words weren't harsh, but they didn't invite refusal either. I hesitated, because sitting down meant accepting that I was no longer just an observer in this moment. It meant I was part of it. But my legs betrayed me before my thoughts caught up, and I lowered myself onto the edge of a nearby chair without realizing I had obeyed. Only then did I notice how far the three men had drifted back. Not much, just enough. Enough to show the shift had already happened. Derek Rowe broke the silence first, but his voice had changed. Less sharp, more uncertain. You're acting like this is some kind of territory issue, he said, trying to regain footing. It's not. Victor finally turned his attention back to them. And when he did, it felt like the room tightened again, but differently this time. Not fear. Finality. No, Victor said. It became one when you lost control of your actions. Mark Sullivan glanced toward the exit, just briefly. I saw it. So did Victor. That's not how this works, Mark said quickly. You don't just decide. I don't decide, Victor interrupted. A beat. Then, I respond. The distinction landed like a weight being set down. Tony Briggs shifted again, stepping slightly behind Derek now, as if proximity to leadership might protect him from consequences. We didn't do anything irreversible, Tony added quickly. We can walk away from this. Victor studied them for a long moment, not judging, calculating. Then his gaze briefly moved toward me again, and I realized something uncomfortable. This wasn't about the three men anymore. It had stopped being that somewhere between the standing chair and the silence that followed. Now it was about what kind of world this would be allowed to remain. You can leave, Victor said finally. The words came slowly, controlled, measured, but they carried a condition that didn't need to be spoken. Derek frowned. Then let us go. Victor nodded once. A simple motion. But no one moved immediately, because everyone understood instinctively that permission wasn't the same as safety. The air felt suspended, like the room itself was waiting to see whether gravity still applied. I looked at Victor without meaning to. He didn't look back this time. Not at me. Not at them. Instead, he looked at the space between all of us, like he was already deciding what this moment would become after it ended. Derek took a cautious step backward. Then another. Mark followed. Tony hesitated longer than the others, eyes flicking once toward me, then away, as if remembering too late that I was no longer the center of their confidence. No one spoke. Not anymore. The power had already shifted so completely that words felt unnecessary. When they finally turned toward the exit, it didn't feel like escape. It felt like permission being accepted too late. Only when the door closed behind them did the restaurant exhale again. But even then, the air didn't fully return to normal. Because Victor Hale hadn't sat back down. And I had the unsettling feeling that what just ended wasn't the situation. It was only the first boundary he chose to draw. In moments like this, justice doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives with certainty so heavy it bends everything around it. The restaurant didn't return to normal after they left. It only pretended to. People resumed their movements, forks touching plates, glasses lifted, quiet conversations restarting, but something fundamental had shifted underneath it all. Like a building after an earthquake that still stands, but never feels identical again. I stayed seated. Not because I was told to, because my body still hadn't decided whether the danger was truly gone. Victor Hale remained standing. That alone kept the room from fully exhaling. He didn't look at the door where the three men had disappeared. He didn't track their exit like a man finishing a confrontation. Instead, his attention drifted back to the space where I was sitting. And this time, it felt less like observation, more like assessment. "You can breathe now," he said quietly. I almost laughed at that. Almost. Because breathing had never been the issue. It was everything else. "I am breathing," I replied, though my voice came out weaker than I intended. Victor didn't comment on that. He simply stepped closer, not into my space, not invading it, but close enough that I became aware of how controlled every movement he made actually was. No wasted motion. No uncertainty. "Did they touch you?" he asked. The question landed differently than everything else tonight. Not as authority, not as power, but as accountability waiting for confirmation. I hesitated. That hesitation answered more than words could. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in calculation that tightened the air again. "Tell me," he said. I swallowed. "No," I admitted. "Not really." A pause. Then he nodded once, as if logging the information somewhere internal. "Good," he said. That word didn't feel like relief. It felt like containment. I finally forced myself to look at him properly. Up close, he didn't look like the kind of man who entered situations late. He looked like someone who allowed them to develop until they reached a point where intervention became absolute. "You didn't have to do that," I said quietly. Victor's gaze stayed on me. "You were wrong," he replied. Simple, direct, no hesitation. That response unsettled me more than anything else. Because it wasn't heroic. It wasn't emotional. It was factual. I could have handled it, I said, though even I didn't fully believe it anymore. Victor tilted his head slightly. A small motion, but one that carried weight. "You were handled," he said. The words didn't insult me. They reframed everything. I looked down at my hands. They were still slightly shaking. Not from fear anymore. From aftermath. The kind that comes when your body finishes surviving before your mind does. Around us, the restaurant kept moving. But it felt distant now, like a scene happening behind glass. Victor finally lowered himself into the chair across from me, not breaking eye contact. For the first time since this started, the power dynamic didn't feel like it was expanding outward. It felt like it was focusing inward. "You work here?" he asked. "Yes," I said. A pause. "And you see things like that often?" he continued. My instinct was to say no, but honesty came out first. "Not like that," I admitted. "But people like them?" "Yes." Victor didn't react immediately. Instead, his fingers tapped once against the edge of the table. A controlled rhythm, like a decision forming. "That stops," he said finally. I frowned slightly. "What stops?" He looked at me then, not as a victim, not as a witness, but as something newly included in a system I didn't understand. "Being alone in it," he said. The words should have sounded comforting, but in his voice, they sounded like structure being imposed on chaos. Like a rule being written where none existed before. I leaned back slightly, unsure what to make of that. "You don't even know me?" I said. Victor's expression didn't change. "I know enough," he replied. A silence followed. Not the dangerous kind from before. A different one. Heavier in a quieter way. Because this wasn't about confrontation anymore. It was about aftermath. And what happens after someone decides you are no longer allowed to be unprotected? Redemption doesn't begin when the danger ends. It begins when silence finally starts to hurt more than fear. I didn't realize how long I had been sitting there until the restaurant noise fully returned. Not abruptly, but gradually, like the world remembering it had a right to exist again. Glasses clinked a little louder. Chairs scraped normally now. Conversations resumed their casual rhythm, but none of it reached me the same way anymore. Everything felt slightly displaced, like I was still standing half a step inside what had just happened. Victor Hale remained across from me, unmoved, unchanged, as if nothing in the last hour had altered his internal baseline at all. And maybe it hadn't. Maybe this was just who he was before I ever noticed. "You're still here," I said quietly. It wasn't meant as anything profound, just an observation my mind couldn't process properly. Victor's gaze stayed steady. "I said I would be," he replied. That simplicity unsettled me more than anything else he had said tonight. Because men like the ones who left earlier made noise when they entered a space. But men like him simply stayed. I looked down at the table, then back at him. "Why?" I asked. The question hung between us longer than I expected. Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked past me for a brief second, at the restaurant, the staff, the ordinary world pretending it hadn't been shaken, then back at me. "Because you didn't have anyone else to," he said. That sentence landed differently. Not like a declaration, like a diagnosis. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady something inside me that didn't have a name yet. "I'm just a waitress," I said, almost reflexively. Victor's expression shifted, barely. Not disagreement. "Correction. You were," he said. That word made my chest tighten. Asterisk were. Asterisk like something had already been rewritten without my consent. I shook my head slightly. "You don't know what kind of trouble follows people like you," I said. "You shouldn't get involved in things like this." For the first time, something faintly closer to emotion passed through his eyes. Not irritation, not amusement, something quieter, like patience being tested, not by me, but by the idea itself. "I don't get involved," he said. "I finish what reaches my attention." That answer should have scared me, and part of it did. But another part, one I didn't trust yet, felt something else entirely. Relief. Because for the first time tonight, the responsibility of being alone wasn't sitting entirely on my shoulders. I pushed a strand of hair behind my ear, trying to regain control of myself. "You could have just left like everyone else," I said. Victor leaned back slightly in his chair. A controlled movement. Almost like he was considering how to explain something that didn't require explanation. "I could have," he admitted. A pause. Then, "But I didn't." The honesty in that was disarming. Not because it was emotional, but because it was irreversible. I studied him more carefully now. The stillness, the precision, the way his attention never drifted, not once, not even when the room around him was full of distractions. People didn't act like that unless they had trained themselves out of instinct, or replaced instinct entirely. "Who are you?" I asked, softer this time. It wasn't fear speaking anymore. It was curiosity I hadn't agreed to feel. Victor didn't answer with a name. Not immediately. Instead, he looked at me for a long moment. Long enough that I began to feel the weight of being seen without interruption. Then he said, "Someone who understands what it means when a situation doesn't stay small." The words weren't comforting, but they were honest in a way that didn't invite argument. I nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. Outside the window, the city continued as if nothing had changed. But inside this small circle of light between us, something had already been decided. Not spoken, not negotiated, just accepted. And I had the unsettling feeling that whatever Victor Hale had stepped into tonight was not something he intended to step out of again. Some endings don't close a story. They redefine what the story was about from the beginning. I didn't expect the silence to feel heavier after it was all over. But it did. Not the dangerous kind from earlier. A different one. The kind that arrives when your mind finally understands what your body survived before your emotions can catch up. The restaurant had fully returned to its rhythm now. Too normal. Almost offensively normal. Like nothing had bent reality only minutes ago. But I could still feel it under my skin. The echo of being cornered. The moment 3 men thought I was alone. The instant everything changed because one man decided it should. Victor Hale sat across from me as if time hadn't moved differently for him at all. He hadn't left. He hadn't explained himself further. He had simply stayed. That was the most unsettling part. People leave after they change your life. He didn't. "You're still here," I said again, softer this time. Victor's eyes lifted to mine. "I told you," he replied. "I would be." The simplicity of it made my throat tighten unexpectedly. I looked down at my hands. They were steady now, but not because the fear was gone, because it had nowhere left to go. "I don't understand you," I admitted. Victor leaned back slightly, studying me like the answer was not something he needed to invent, but something I needed to accept. You don't need to, he said. A pause. Then, quieter. Not yet. That word stayed with me longer than I expected. Not yet. Like the story wasn't finished. Like I had only seen the first layer of something far larger than a single night in a restaurant. I exhaled slowly. You could have just walked away, I said again, though I wasn't sure why I kept returning to that idea. It wasn't your problem. Victor's gaze didn't shift. It became mine the moment you didn't have a way out, he said. The answer wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was structural, like he was describing how gravity works. I leaned back slightly in my chair, suddenly aware of how different the world felt compared to when my shift started. I don't want to be someone's problem, I said quietly. Victor's expression changed, barely, but enough. You're not a problem, he said. A pause. Then, you're a point of exposure. I frowned slightly. That doesn't sound better. It isn't meant to, he replied. The honesty of that almost made me smile. Almost. Outside, the city lights reflected off the glass, soft and indifferent. People moved through streets without knowing what had shifted inside this one room. I wondered how many moments like this existed in the world, where one person almost became nothing more than a bad memory, and then didn't. I don't know what happens now, I said. It was the first time I said it out loud. Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked past me briefly, as if mapping something larger than this table, this restaurant, this night. Then he returned his attention to me. Now, he said, you stop being alone in it. That sentence should have felt comforting, but it didn't feel simple enough to be comfort. It felt like a beginning of structure being placed where chaos used to be. I studied him for a long moment. You talk like everything is already decided, I said. Victor didn't deny it, because he didn't need to. I decide what reaches my attention, he said. After that, the rest follows. I sat there quietly, absorbing the weight of that logic. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't control in the way fear understands it. It was something more permanent. Something that didn't ask permission to exist in your life. The restaurant around us kept moving, but I no longer felt like I was part of its background noise. I felt like I had been moved somewhere else entirely without physically leaving my seat. And Victor Hale, still sitting across from me, looked like a man who had not entered my life tonight, but had simply revealed that it was already connected to his.